Hi guys, welcome back to book club. I am very excited to be back doing this. Thank you for your patience with me. I really want to make all of these very special, and that's why I take a lot of time in between trying to pick what the right book is, what the right topic is, and try to make them all quite meaningful. So thank you for your patience. I'm very excited for today because we are doing The Overstory by Richard Powers, which is a book that I read about 2 years ago, and it just really resonated with me. It was published in 2018 and won the Pulitzer Prize in 2019. And it follows a bunch of different storylines of people and their struggles to make their environmental protests heard. It deals with time and hope for our future. And, we're really just using this book today as a jumping off point to talk about environmental activism, which I think is very important. And who better to bring on than Leah Thomas, who truly, when I decided that this was the book that I wanted to do and the conversation that I wanted to have, I was like, if I could have anyone on, it would be Leah. I've been following what she does for a really long time now. I think she makes environmentalism look so cool and accessible and explains it in ways that I think are really attainable for people. And I've always just been such an admirer of her. I took notes because I'm very official now, guys. So I also don't want to miss anything about Leah because she's so cool in what she does and she's accomplished so much. So she founded a nonprofit called Intersectional Environmentalist, which is a great source if you ever want to learn anything about the environment and kind of where to start. She also wrote a book by the same name in 2022. She also talks a lot about environmentalism and how it relates to social justice, which I think is really cool. And I could talk about Leah forever, but I will bring her on because you probably want to hear her talk more than you want to hear me talk. But before I do, I want to read a quote from the Overstory that resonated with me and I think will be a good jumping off point for today. You and the tree in your backyard come from a common ancestor. 1.5 billion years ago, the two of you parted ways. But even now, after an immense journey in separate directions, that tree and you still share 1/4 of your genes. Now, I think this is important to remember when a lot of the times I think as humans, we forget our connection to nature and we take a lot from it and we don't give a lot back. So I think that that's a very powerful thing to remember. And without further ado, let me try to remember how to use Instagram Live and bring Leah on. Hopefully this works.
Hi.
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 How are you?
I'm great. I'm in a pickup truck in Santa Barbara, so hopefully my service isn't too bad.
No,
but
you're
thank
great.
you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being on. It's perfect that you're in Santa Barbara with trees behind you. Truly couldn't have asked for a better intro. So thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to give a little intro as to what you do and intersectional environmentalism and sort of how that came about and why you started that and when?
Yeah, of course. So I've always been really passionate about plants and animals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said it perfectly. It's so important to remember our inherent connection to nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really know I was an environmental nerd until a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always just running around, catching toads and things like that. Fast forward to college, I studied environmental science and policy and was a park ranger for 2 summers, which was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I was super fascinated about kind of uncovering diverse stories within the environmental movement, stories that are often underreported of women in conservation, not just John Muir, of people of color and those sorts of things. So I kind of went on a journey to see if I could create an educational platform that was really accessible and uncovered some of those stories. And that's why I started IE, or Intersectional Environmentalist. And I've just been talking about it ever since.
I think it's so cool what you do, because oftentimes I think people prematurely give up because it seems like such a massive issue and no one knows where to start.
Yeah.
And so I've always found, you know, the pieces that you write and what you do very accessible and just very helpful for people. And so I wanted to ask, how did the Overstory resonate with you, and how does a book like this, if it does, affect the work that you do?
Yeah, so I'm also a tree nerd. Someone else who I adore that I believe was a part of this book was Suzanne Simard, who has a book called Finding the Mother Tree. But I think there's just so many, I think the biggest thing was just our inherent connection to the world around us. And if we forget for a second while we're living in our, you know, our cities, our apartments, our homes, that we're separate from nature, nature has a way of reminding us that no, we are actually in a great big ecosystem. We're connected. So I related to that, and then just seeing all the different stories of people coming to environmental activism or environmental awareness in their own way. I thought that was so cool, because everyone can have a personal journey to environmentalism that might look so different from someone else. So yeah.
And was there, speaking of those characters and sort of their different environmentalism, was there one character that resonated the most with you, or maybe a story that you felt like was the hardest to relate to?
I think a story that was really hard to relate to, but heartbreaking because so many people do, and it's been a while, but there's a story of someone who had lost their family due to environmental injustice. And I had never had that personal experience, but it was really heartbreaking, and a story that a lot of people share. And then there was a character who I believe went into publishing and kind of saw writing as a tool for activism. So I really related to that, because I'm not necessarily a traditional activist where I'm always taking it to the streets. But I think writing is a way to express my love for the earth. So I kind of related to that story as well.
Absolutely. And why do you think it's important for especially young people to read a book like this, or a book that deals with these topics and get involved in environmentalism? I mean,
I don't want to.
So many reasons. I know I can't boil it down to one, but
yeah, I don't want to sound like too much of a tree hugger, but we're talking about trees, so I think it's okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's important because, yeah, people forget that we're a part of nature, like we were talking about earlier, and they think nature is something that we have to go into. So we have to go to a national park, do all these things. But it's like, no, even just a walk around your neighborhood or sitting on your porch is a nature experience and a way to connect with the world around you. And what better than to connect with trees? They're everywhere in urban environments, suburban environments, etc. So yeah.
I think when I read this book, it was one of those books where I like never looked at the world the same again. And I think when you realize, especially how small our lifespan is compared to a lot of trees, and kind of how little we are compared to them, you realize sort of how important it is to preserve these things that are really so much more powerful and live so much longer than we do.
They're so cool. And not to nerd out about, you know what, I can nerd out about trees.
This is a space to nerd out about trees.
This is the time. But trees, oh my God, they just, so it's so important to both, when you're going for a walk, to look up and to look down, overstory, understory. But there's worlds beneath our feet. So the roots of the trees go deep down into the soil. And I think it's so important to also look up and see these magnificent creatures in the sky that hold so much, you know, wisdom. And maybe that wisdom might not be human wisdom, but they've sometimes existed for centuries. So they're carrying pieces of those centuries throughout their roots. And trees, unfortunately, when they're cut down, you can even look at the rings of the trees to see how long they've been around. So they hold such beautiful stories, and we can learn so much from, you know, looking up or looking down at the ground.
There's a character in the book who's talks about how trees can communicate with each other under the ground. And I thought that was so cool, and also this like sort of community aspect that they have, that they truly are communicating with each other. They have life inside them. They, have a consciousness. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, have you studied that at all? Did you have experience with that?
Yeah, so Suzanne Simard, who did some of the research
Mm-hmm.
that I think inspired that story.
Mm-hmm.
So trees have something called mycelial networks, and they essentially communicate with each other, like you
Yeah.
said. And I think it's so fascinating to see trees as living beings, and them communicating and telling that story, I think, is a way for us humans to go, okay, well, they have their own way of
Mm-hmm.
talking to themselves. They're not just stoic beings, they have
Yeah.
their own experiences.
Yeah.
But yeah, tree science is so cool. And I think another thing to remember is that they help us literally breathe, like they're purifying
We
the air.
would not be here
Without
without
trees,
them.
like
Yeah.
we wouldn't be breathing.
Yeah.
So to give thanks for them, and
Yeah.
everything that they're doing, their ecosystem services, as they call it, which is free for us. So that's why it's so important that they're standing, purifying our air, especially in urban environments that don't have enough trees. So yeah.
What happens to an environment when it doesn't have enough trees? I mean, I'm sure
Yeah,
there's
sad.
that are, like, what are
Yeah.
the first things that you see when,
Mm,
forestation happens?
yeah. Yeah. So when you're in, I'll start with urban environments and talk about other ones as well. But when you're in urban environments, the lack of trees actually increases heat-related illnesses and makes the environment a lot warmer, because without that shade, unfortunately, temperatures are hotter in urban environments. And these are also the areas that are struggling the most with air pollution. So a really simple natural solve to some of these issues would really be planting more trees. And then, like what you were touching on, trees, when they help us breathe, are performing something called carbon sequestration, which is just like tree breath. And they're purifying our air. So those huge forests are essentially carbon sinks, as they call them. And if we were able to plant a lot of trees, have more forests, they can act as what they call carbon sinks, kind of, and really reverse some of the impacts of the climate
Wow.
crisis if we were able to do that
Yeah.
at scale. So it's so, so important.
Yeah. I feel like oftentimes people are like, global warming is happening and this is happening and what do we do? And
Trees.
it's like, plant trees.
Yeah.
you know? I also, in the book, it talks about how people who are speaking up about issues like this, it's like being the only person when the house is on fire who's like screaming and running and everyone looks at you like you're crazy. Have you ever felt that, being doing the work that you do?
Oh my God, all the time. But I took it as a learning opportunity to just say, like, this is the reality. Some people don't get it, and it's not because they don't want to. Like, some people are just trying to survive. So when I talk about climate crisis, they're like, well, I'm just trying to figure out how to live my day to day. So I've been trying to do what you kind of mentioned earlier, like infusing joy into climate education and then showing people the solutions. So when we talk about air pollution, also talking about trees and how that can solve the problem. Because when you start talking about solutions, I think people get more motivated, more hopeful, and inspired to act, for sure.
Absolutely. The overstory is split into 4 sections, which is roots, trunk, crown, and seeds. Why do you think Richard Powers decided to break it up this way?
I would say maybe like we were talking about earlier, which was just a two-parter of kind of the worlds beneath our feet and the worlds above us and all the wisdom that holds. And once you kind of learn that knowledge, to plant seeds, to spread it on, etc. So I guess maybe it was broken down that way as a sort of journey to pay homage to that.
Yeah, I also loved how a lot of the characters in the story are associated with a specific tree. Do you have a tree that you feel like represents you and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Wow, I love all the trees, but I really like conifers,
Okay.
which they have cones, I believe. I could be getting that wrong. Someone's gonna be like, wrong. But trees with
Who doesn't know
cones.
about trees?
Yeah. I like trees with cones. Those are my favorite.
Okay, amazing. I know you said you're passionate about tree equity. For the people who don't know what that is, would you like to explain a little bit about tree equity?
Yeah, so there's two incredible orgs that I adore called American Forests, and then also one called Tree People, which is in LA.
Yeah.
But American Forest did a study that showed that tree coverage or the presence of trees is connected to income. So the more income you have, the more trees are in your neighborhoods, and
Wow.
vice versa. So that's an example of tree inequity, and that's correlating to what we spoke about, like air pollution with less trees, etc.
Wow.
So tree equity is trying to bring trees to the people so we can have cleaner air, less warm cities, and get those, positive ecosystem services to help purify and restore balance to the earth.
Amazing. You released your own book last year. Congrats. That's very exciting. Can you talk a little bit about what that process was like and, what it meant to write that and sort of what that journey was like for you?
Yeah, it was the book that I wish I had as kind of a young Black environmental science student, where I could see myself reflected in some of the stories and learn about, amazing Black history. But not only that, I wanted it to be as accessible as possible, because connecting social justice to environmentalism isn't always, it's hard. It's not the simplest of topics,
No.
but I think it's so important and so urgent. So I wanted to create kind of a 101 accessible textbook for people to learn. That's why I wrote the book. It's kind of a love letter to the intersectional environmentalist movement and all the people who have been a part of it. And I wrote it when I was 25. I'm 28 now, and it's been a really cool journey.
Yeah. Congrats. I think writing a book is like the coolest thing that someone can do and probably the hardest. So congrats.
Yeah.
I loved in your book, you talk about where the term Mother Nature comes from. For people who haven't read it, and I'm going to recommend everyone to read it if they haven't, I just loved this little excerpt that you said about that. Do you kind of want to explain that on here?
Yeah, so this also can connect back to trees. So one of the reasons people, and I talk about it in my book, they call us tree huggers, is because in India there was movements where a group of women got together and held hands around a tree in India. So that's where the term tree hugger comes from. And I also want to give a shout out to the women, because there's more women environmentalists out there. But it comes from Mother Earth, kind of comes from so many creation theories from cultures around the world. Almost all of them kind of relate the earth to some sort of feminine deity of sorts, which is interesting, because I think that everyone should be responsible for restoring balance to the earth. But that's where it comes from. Lots of, goddess stories, ancient Greek stories connect back to some sort of Mother Earth kind of deity.
I love that. In the Overstory, Patricia, who's one of the characters, asks, and this is a really difficult question, but I'm going to put you on the spot. What's the single best thing a person can do for tomorrow's world? How would you answer that?
Oh, that's so big. But I would say support local as much as you can. So that just helps create resilient communities. So even if one of your friends is making t-shirts, or the local farmers market, you can decrease your carbon footprint. And that's hard because it's one piece of advice, but I would say that's an easy place for people to start. Yeah.
I think having easy places to start are so important, because it's, like I said before, feels so much bigger than us. And I think oftentimes people don't even try because they don't know if what they are, a singular person is going to do will make a difference. But what do you say to those people who say I'm just one person?
And hopefully my service isn't going out too bad. But I would say that systems change only happens when a bunch of individuals decide to act for a shared cause. So I would say that we can't have systems change without individual change, and vice versa.
That's amazing. I think everyone has learned something today. Thank you so much for coming on. Truly, like I said before, I couldn't think of a better person to have on to discuss this. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you for having me. Bye,
Of
everybody.
course. Bye.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I feel like we just got a master class in environmental activism. If you don't already, please follow Leah and Intersectional Environmentalist. She is always creating things and content on how we can make the world a better place. And I really do think there needs to be more people like her. And thank you for watching and for tuning in. I hope this conversation was helpful, even if you got halfway through the book or a quarter of the way through the book or didn't even pick up the book at all. I really just wanted to use it as a jumping off point. So, it's quite a dense book, but thank you guys. And I think we're going to get back to doing book club on more of a regular basis now. So I am excited. I have some ideas swirling around in my head for what's going to come next. And thank you very much. Bye.